had faith in him because we still relied upon him and not so much as much as ourselves. And we've seen God do some wonderful things in the life of this nation. He has fought our wars for us and given us victory. He has provided in so many ways. And we are the most blessed nation on the face of the earth. There's no question about that. But it's only because we have been a nation that, to some degree, had a love for God, and I'll say our God. Someone has said that one thing we have learned from history is that we do not learn from history. We read the history around us, we read the history of the Bible, but I think we sometimes forget that we are currently writing our own history. In the days to come, people will look back, and as we just had our 216th homecoming, we reviewed some history, and Eddie did very well on that, and I appreciated it. And it was a great day last Sunday. It was a wonderful homecoming. Thank you for being a part of it. But one day, in the very near future, the next generation will look at our history and they will critique that history. They will make assertions about that history as to whether it was good or bad or mediocre, or whether it accomplished any of those things or accomplished very little of those things. But our future is always right in front of us. We are writing it every day, and we are waiting on it to be written ultimately. When you come to Psalm 78, you come at a time when, and the full body of the psalm is, we're just going to look at the first probably 8 verses of it. The entirety of the 72 verses of it deal with the history of Israel. And I don't have time to go into all that, and I might hear you snoring if I started that. So I just want to give you a synopsis by saying that God led them out of captivity, and he led them very powerfully through the Red Sea, and he provided for them miraculously with manna from heaven and quail unnumbered that came into the camp to give them meat, and water from desert rocks, and they still rebelled against him. And they wanted to go their own way. And you know the end of that story. As the Bible tells us, their carcasses died in the wilderness after 40 years. God will not let them enter in his prepared possession for them. But Israel would not learn from that. They would not learn from their history, but they would continue to repeat that history. We see them coming into the promised land about a third generation. They were building those idols. They were rejecting God. They were desiring everything but him, and they had gone their own way. And then the cycle started. You can read it in the Judges. God would give them over to another vile country. An evil people would come in and take control of it. And then they would cry out to God. And God, in his gracious kindness, his goodness, his love, that's never fails, he would send a deliverer to them. And then for a period of time, they would experience goodness and prosperity, growth. And then they would return back to their bond. I'm going to say some things to you, and I will not finish this message this morning. I will conclude it next week. So that means I at least I get to keep my job for 2 weeks anyway. But I'm going to say some things to us. And I want to clarify, well, even as Jeremiah, as we talked about him, Jeremiah said what God wanted him to say. But they called him the weeping prophet because he didn't want to say it. But it was required of his God. I'm going to say some things to you in the next couple of weeks that are going to be unpleasant. But I wouldn't say it if I didn't think it wasn't necessary. And I was not compelled to say it. I take no joy in it. But I believe it needs to be said. What's happened here is that Israel has come to the point, and really this psalm is telling the story of the northern kingdom. Now what's happened is that they continue to rebel against God, and finally the kings of Israel became so bad that the kingdom split in two. And you had 10 tribes, and they called the northern tribes. They split from Judah and Benjamin, and they went their own way. Because they had taken up idol worship, burning their children in the fire, every debauchery, every licentious thing that they could think of, they began to act it out. And so they broke away. And now you have two kingdoms that have been formed. And God has put in the psalmist's heart to speak to Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And in essence, what he's saying to them is, I'm going to remind you of your history. I'm going to remind you of who I've been in that history and how you have performed in that history. And what it has brought you to today. I'm going to bring you to a culmination of your attitude and your actions and your motives and your desires so that you can have a full understanding of what's taken place. In other words, he's saying, and he explains it all through this, you have this kingdom who's gone off and will go off into obscurity. They will disappear because of what they are and their rejection of me, God speaking. And the psalmist is coming to Judah and Benjamin to remind them that they have now another opportunity. Not to be like this. Here's an example, a bad example. You see what it looks like, what it stinks like, the putridness of it, and the destruction of it. And I want to remind you not only of that history, but I want to remind you of the goodness and the grace of the God who's brought you this far. And the promise that it holds if you will hold to the promise keeper. And so, as we understand that as the church of the living God, I think we can take some very strong lessons from these several verses that I just want to share. So let me read those to you. Psalm 78, beginning in verse 1, it says, and I'm reading out of the New King James, "Give ear, O my people, to my law," or my teaching. "Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings or hidden things of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and His strength and His wonderful works that He has done. For He established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, or teachings, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, and the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare to them their children, that they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God." There's a lot of truth in these 8 verses. The first thing that I see in this is that we have a need to remember history. We must remember history if we will not fall to the same failings that occurred in that history. And we need to understand, as someone else has said, that history is simply His story. Because God is our Creator. He has put all this into motion. He has worked behind the scenes most of the time, stepped out in the limelight on many occasions, but He has put this in motion, and He comes to a people, and He speaks to those people, and He works in the heart and lives of people to bring about His redemption. We must realize and not just read past history, but we need to understand that we also are creating history. Our lives matter. Who we are and what we do is not escaped by God's keen eye. As a matter